We've been getting some amazing JRPG remakes lately, and that train doesn't look like it's going to be slowing down anytime soon in 2025. Last year, I talked about the best JRPG remakes, so to get a little bit meta here, I'll be doing my own remake of that video with some new entries and reordered positioning. Let's call this a definitive edition. So in this video, I'll be sharing the updated 10 best JRPG remakes of all time. These are games that desperately needed remakes, and I know a lot of people may not consider them remakes. I mean, it's in the name, remasters, but you know what? It's my list, so I don't really care. Now, some of the older Final Fantasies are beyond unplayable. Try playing OG Final Fantasy 1. It's just awful. So all these enhancements make those games much more playable and actually fun. You can speed up the combat to make it more fun. You have the ability to increase the amount of gil and experience you get, so you don't have to sit there and grind over and over. And I played through them all in 2023, and it was just so fun to finally be able to go through those games in a tolerable way. Of course, there are updated visuals, but it's debatable on whether or not it's better, because they're not exactly, HD 2D remake visuals. They're kind of more enhanced pixels. And there's also newly arranged soundtracks, but what's cool is you can play the old ones if you want. Now, why these aren't higher is because, unfortunately, one thing they really couldn't fix was the design of these games. One of my biggest problem with these old RPGs is it's really hard to figure out where you're supposed to go next. There's obviously no marker on the map, and a lot of times the game doesn't even tell you what you're supposed to do next. You kind of just wander around aimlessly. I was always playing with a guide with these games just because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And despite what some might say, I feel like if you bundle them all together, it's a pretty great value for what you get with all of these games. Now, that all said, it would be nice if we could get true ground up remakes in, say, the HD 2D style. I mean, can you imagine Final Fantasy 4 or Final Fantasy 6 in HD 2D? One can dream. Now we're finally getting to the first game on this list that probably needed a remake the most, and that is Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia. The original game, titled Fire Emblem Gaiden, was not only a really weird game with a lot of interesting design choices, but was also on the original Nintendo and is pretty archaic by today's standards. Now when you play Shadows of Valentia, obviously the first thing you notice is the visual upgrade. It's much more in line with the 3DS Fire Emblem titles and looks pretty good. They also added voice acting and some really beautiful anime cutscenes. Now as far as the gameplay changes go, the original game was very punishing, and they added a ton of new things here to make it more playable. First and foremost, obviously, is they added a casual mode, so no more permadeath if you don't want it, which I love. It makes the game much more tolerable. Also, from a story perspective, they added a new prologue, so you kind of get a more feel for Alm and Celica's story. You can see how they grew up together, which I appreciate. They added Mila's turn wheel, which essentially lets you rewind turns. I love that in strategy RPGs, because sometimes you can really mess up a turn and really mess up the entire battle, so the fact that you don't have to start all the way from the beginning is really nice. There's also a weapon forging system that's really cool, and also they added a bonus 6th chapter that's after the end of the game. And of course, if you have some amiibos, you can unlock new dungeons and summon some more monsters. It's kind of shocking how playable this remake is compared to the original. That game was only the second one in the series, but it removed things like the weapon triangle and had some interesting design choices like explorable dungeons and towns, but now it's actually really fun. It feels more like a traditional JRPG, but just with strategy RPG battles. Overall, it's a really great game and considered one of the favorites amongst hardcore Fire Emblem fans, and you should definitely give it a try if you haven't. Now, Dragon Quest III is no stranger to remakes and ports, but now thankfully we have the absolute best way to play this JRPG classic with the HD 2D remake. Obviously, it's in the name, the visuals are gorgeous. It looks incredible in that new HD 2D style. Everything from the way the characters look, the environments, the monsters, it all looks incredible. It also has enhanced music and sound effects. Obviously, if we're going to play the NES version, we don't want those bleeps and boops. It's going to be way better here. And there's also so many other amazing new enhancements and features. Now, there's actually a bunch of new story content. Here, we get stuff from Ortega, the main character's father. And there's also these special episodes to expand the trilogy's lore that you'll see throughout the game, not to mention a ton of new things to gameplay. And this is where I think the game needed help the most. We've got a bunch of new monsters, new bosses. We've got a speed up mechanic, thank God, to the combat, so you can keep it normal speed or you can really speed it up to make it more palatable. The game will visually show your character's equipment, which I think is really cool. I couldn't really do that back in the day. There's a new class, the Monster Wrangler, and there's a bunch of new areas throughout the world called Monster Arenas where you can use this class, and that's a really cool thing to partake in. And there's also extra abilities for classes that didn't have magic. Now they have abilities, so things like the Monk and the Warrior. So that's really cool, a new added way to attack and combat. Now, I will say, for people that don't like these old school style JRPGs, it is a little bit grindy, so be prepared for that. And the story isn't super compelling, but they did the best they could, especially with this new HD 2D style. But in terms of its quality as a remake, it's hard to deny that this is now far and away the best version of this game. Now, probably the game that needed a remake the least on this entire list was Super Mario RPG, but despite that, it still sits really high on this list because of what it did to fix a great game and make it even better. Obviously, we have the updated visuals. They look amazing. It still remains pretty faithful to that original style, but obviously it upgrades it for modern consoles and it runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second. We also have a rearranged soundtrack that I think is crucial to the experience. I mean, if you play this game with the sound off, I feel like you're totally missing what makes this game great. And in terms of actual gameplay stuff, the game overall is less grindy. You can kind of mainline this game without fighting a lot of enemies, and you could be properly leveled. Also, you could actually fast travel instead of having to go city by city to go all the way through these different levels, so that makes it much more tolerable. Plus, you have these new team-up attacks that are all different depending on what your party makeup is, so I thought that was really neat. Now, because of some of these enhancements, the game is probably like almost 10 hours shorter, but I think it's a much tighter experience. And me personally, I would rather have a game that's tighter and shorter than long and drawn out and not as fun. Now, one reason why this game isn't higher on this list, and one thing that they didn't fix, and I don't know if they could have fixed, was the platforming. Some of the platforming in this game is just so annoying, and I think the problem is because it's from an isometric perspective, so it's really hard to judge jumps. I can't tell you how many times I would fail a jump just because I couldn't tell how far I needed to jump or what I was really supposed to do. It got really, really annoying, and it would have been nice if they could have found a way to fix that. That all said, it's an amazing game, definitely one of the best classic JRPGs, and now one of the best JRPG remakes. Star Ocean: The Second Story R is not only one of 2023's best games, but now stands as one of the best JRPG remakes of all time. That HD 2D visual art style does a lot of heavy lifting and is a huge reason why this game is so high on the list. The original game doesn't look bad, but my god, does it look incredible with this new art style. And what's cool is it finds a way to stay faithful while using those same original sprite designs, but adding beautiful new lighting and a breathtaking new world to explore. It was just jaw-droppingly gorgeous, and I loved every time I got to a new town. I just loved exploring every little corner. There's also new character portraits. You could use the old ones if you wanted to, but there's new ones, new voice acting, rearranged soundtrack, so all the bells and whistles you would expect. And there's also a ton, and I mean a ton of new gameplay enhancements, big and small, that I don't have enough time to list them all, but a few that really make a big difference is one, auto-saving. Obviously, a lot of classic JRPGs, you have to go to a save point, but here it has auto-saving. You can actually fast travel between towns, so it saves a lot of time. There's also more overworld activities, so you can go around, find treasures, get into fights and stuff like that. You can now call in characters into combat, which adds a totally new wrinkle to combat. And what's fun is it adds characters from other Star Ocean games, so it's sort of a celebration of the whole series in a way. Not to mention a laundry list of other little things that make it more playable. Now, I really wanted to put this higher, maybe even number one, but I just couldn't because of how bad some of the designs for the dungeons are. There's a couple dungeons in this game where I almost turned the game off and stopped playing because they were so annoying. Genuinely some of the worst JRPG dungeons I've ever played. That said, the positives totally outweigh the negatives, and this stands as an amazing game. And if you like classic JRPGs, you gotta play this remake. Now, one JRPG series that's infamous for doing a ton of remakes is the Pokemon franchise, but really the only remakes that could have made this list were Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Seeing the Johto region make the leap from 2D to 3D on the DS was so incredible. It had this brand new cozy vibe, so much more colorful. It looked amazing. Now, it would have been nice if they could have updated those MIDI style sound effects, but they ended up using those for years to come, so I guess it's not that big of a deal. And of course, you have those classic starters, Cyndaquil, Chikorita, and Totodile. Totodile being my personal favorite. But what's cool is there's a lot of interesting things they added. For one, they had these timed events back in the day. Obviously, a lot of that isn't available now, but at the time it was really cool. They had new mini games that you could partake in that made for some really fun situations and just added to the experience overall. You can have Pokemon follow you like Pokemon Yellow. I mean, it was only one, but still, it was really cool. I love little flourishes like that. This is just a jam-packed game full of value, and the fact that you can go to 2 different regions and, you know, get all these different badges, it was just amazing. And also, every game came with something called a Pokewalker. It was kind of like a Tamagotchi-like item where you could take Pokemon with you and play a little mini game on this little device. Again, much like some of those timed events, it's probably not super relevant now, but back in the day, it was really, really neat. Heart Gold and Soul Silver might not only be the best Pokemon remakes of all time, but might just be straight up the best Pokemon games ever made. Persona 3 Reload is such a solid remake in every way from top to bottom. Obviously, we have the visual enhancements, putting it more in line with Persona 5, not only with just the character models and the environments, but also the UI and the menus. I mean, it looks incredible, especially in combat when you do those all-out attacks. The menus look amazing when the character kind of like splashes down and there's bubbles that fly everywhere. I think that looks so cool. Visually, it just looks absolutely amazing compared to the PlayStation 2 version. And it also took a lot of combat elements from Persona 5. They call it something different here. They call it Shift, but it's basically the baton pass from Persona 5 where you can swap out characters mid-battle so you can kind of take advantage of enemy weaknesses. They also have something called Third-G here, which are basically like super moves for each character depending on which persona you have equipped. Thank God they got rid of the fatigue mechanic, so you can just explore till your characters run out of HP and MP or whatever you want to do, so you don't have to worry about the fatigue mechanic. You can actually control all your party members, which you couldn't in the original game. And overall, I just found the game a lot easier, even on the normal difficulty. There's also some cool new ways to increase the social elements by cooking and studying with party members and other characters throughout the game. And they did the best they could with Tartarus. Now it's still visually bland, like there's not much they could do there because it's just a big tower, but there's all these locked chests around that you can unlock. There's breakable objects to give you items, and there are the Menad doors, which if you beat the enemies behind them, you get extra items. So just tons of different ways to level up, grind, and enhance your party. Now that's not to say it's perfect, because it isn't. I feel like they kind of missed with Akihiko here. I feel like the voice actor, he did a great job in his performance, but I just feel like what his voice sounds like doesn't match super well. I feel like he's a different character. I felt like he was this sort of quiet, tough guy in the original game, but now in this one, he feels a little bit more wimpy, I guess. Now they did eventually add the Answer DLC from FES, but again, it's DLC. It wasn't baked into the game, so I know that kind of irked some people. And of course, the big one is there's no female main character, and Atlas said that that would have been a mammoth undertaking because they would have had to change so much throughout the game with voice acting and the way characters interacted with each other. However, there is a mod on PC. It is just visual, like you could just swap out the character models and things are more pink. But overall, I think it's really cool that the mod community did this. So if you're interested, you can go try that out. And overall, it's just an amazing remake and, in my opinion, the definitive way to play this game. Now, I know fans are a bit divided on the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy and the overall direction Square Enix is taking with it, but there's no denying the quality of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It's not just an amazing game, but an unbelievable remake, literally. I couldn't believe what I was playing and how jam-packed with content this game is. Smaller areas in the original game got expanded in huge ways, like Calm, Costa del Sol, and the Gold Saucer, and just so much more. I was literally in tears when I got to the Gold Saucer because I couldn't believe what they did with that area and how much better and how much cooler it was. Not to mention they added a bunch of extra content like Queen's Blood and a ton of mini games. Not only all of this, but it gives you more time with all these different characters from the original. Personally, my favorite character in this game was Yuffie. She's so cute, so charming, and just a powerhouse in combat, and I love how integral to this game she was. And once again, it goes without saying that the music is perfection, easily the best soundtrack of the year, one of the best soundtracks of all time. Now, all this said, there are some drawbacks. Now, I mentioned the mini games earlier, and I personally didn't mind it, but I know that some people thought there were way too many, and there were some that just felt unnecessary. Like, do we really need a mini game to pull out a mushroom? And don't even get me started on that Kate Sith Shinra mention level. Like, holy hell, was that bad. Now, there was almost too much content in this game as well, which might sound crazy because I know people want value from their game. I think what ended up happening was the end of the game was so compelling and people didn't want to get spoiled that people just kind of wanted to rush to the end and not partake in all this content, which is unfortunate because I thought most of the content was really good. Like, I don't blame anyone that just wanted to get to the end. And also there were some areas that moved or you didn't go to, like for example, Fort Condor wasn't in the game, which I totally anticipated. Not a total surprise. You don't go to Rocket Town even though Sid is in the game, which I found a little bit odd. And obviously Sid and Vincent aren't playable. They're going to be playable in the third game, but still it's a little bit sad that they weren't playable here. Overall, I have to say this was an amazing experience. Genuinely one of my favorite games of all time and a pretty great remake. Now, I think a lot of people look at Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition as a remaster, but to me, it's one of the most impressive remakes of all time. Obviously, what grabs you right away is the visual upgrade. I mean, the original Wii game is rough to look at, so the fact that it's not only tolerable, but beautiful is awesome. On top of that, it has tons of other great enhancements like an updated soundtrack, better user interface so you can see what you're doing in combat and exploration. The Colony 6 reconstruction was made way easier. You have more difficulty options that make for a better experience overall. Plus, something that I love that they added was fashion equipment. Instead of just having that same attire for each character, you can kind of change what they look like. Depending on what gear you equip, it'll change how the character looks. I just love stuff like that. But to me, the single biggest enhancement and what makes this game so high on this list is the map design. Not just the map design, but the overall user interface and everything that goes into exploring this world. Exploring the world in the original Wii version was such a chore. It was so hard to figure out where you're supposed to go. And what was so shocking is when I looked at completion times, the definitive edition can be in almost 20 fewer hours compared to the Wii version. And it's really only because of the map and how much easier it is to explore and how much easier it is to get around. I mean, to me, that is a sign of a great remake when it totally gets rid of the flaws of the original and makes the game more playable. I don't have as much time to play games these days, so the fact that you can play a tighter experience and get rid of all the fluff is amazing. And on top of that, they added an entire new epilogue called Future Connected that takes place a year after the events of the original game. And that's like 15 to 20 hours. It's like its own game. That's incredible. Overall, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is one of the best games on Nintendo Switch, one of the best JRPG remakes of all time, but I couldn't put it at number one because really there's only one game that I had to put on this list as number one. And at the tippy top at number one, I've got Trials of Mana, and I can't wait for the comments on this one, but hear me out. Obviously, Trials of Mana originally was a 16-bit Super Nintendo RPG, but we never got it in the West until Collection of Mana. Now, it's a fun game. It's a 2D kind of like hack and slash action RPG, but obviously that's very different from a full 3D game. But then here comes this gorgeous looking remake in 2020. It's beautifully remade in full 3D. However, it still remains faithful to that original design, not only in, picking the different characters and how you start the game, but also just the general design of the levels. And it keeps that original charm, even down to weird things like those dancing shopkeepers. Yes, those were in the original game. But what's really impressive is that it manages to modernize the combat and make it fun for all 6 characters. It's not easy to take a game that's in 2D and translate it into 3D, and every character was unique and super fun. Yes, even Shawit. But to me, what's most impressive and why I put it at number one is that it single-handedly revived the Mana franchise. I think there were so many people that had never played this franchise before, but jumped in with this remake and loved it. And I'm one of them. I've never played a Mana game before this game. It sold incredibly well, and because of that, we got the first new release in the series in over 15 years last year with Visions of Mana. When a remake can not only faithfully bring an old game up to modern standards in a good way, but also revitalize said franchise, there's really nothing more impressive than that. Now, these are the 10 best JRPG remakes so far, but there's more on the way in 2025. To see them and other great JRPGs set to drop in 2025, be sure to check out this video right here.